So a quick background on Cristina Pandol. It is truly a pleasure to have Cristina here with us today. She's a creative director for the Golden State Warriors. The last 15 years, Cristina has led creative departments at some of the largest media agencies in the world, including William Morris Endeavor and Westbrook Media. These firsthand experiences with celebrity-driven campaigns translate perfectly, from my perspective, to the from the media landscape to the sports world. And last November is when Cristina made the jump upstate into her new role with the Warriors. Cristina, a warm welcome and thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, Shane, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. In terms of a team or a campaign I'm envious of, specific to the in-game kind of experience, I think the LA Kings do a really good job. So that's hockey. But if you haven't been over to, what's Staples' new name, Crypto Bank Arena, I recommend checking out a hockey game. It's a really beautiful uniform and consistent, but also kind of, let's say, a little edgy, creative kind of direction for all their in-arena graphics.
Love that. Cool. Next up, we've got David Bradley. David honestly is a legend, and I feel honored to have him with us today. As a creative director at Duke men's basketball, David has spent over 20 years shaping the Blue Devils into a globally recognized brand. Today, Duke has the largest following on social media of any college athletics team in the country, and it is not even close. David was actually one of our first customers at Air, and he's really been a critical mentor for the team and I on how to build and shape this product. So super excited to have you, David, and thanks for being with us today.
Appreciate the warm intro there, Shane. Legend's a pretty strong word, so I don't know about all that, but I appreciate that. A couple campaigns, teams I really admire. One, I got to shout out the Carolina Hurricanes, our neighbors here. They do an awesome job, top to bottom, really consistent. Their brand feels the same all the time, in arena, social, all the things, marketing, everything. And then the Orlando Magic. They got a couple of our former players, Paulo Banchero and Wendell Carter Jr. We went down there recently, connect with them. Super creative, forward thinking, and awesome folks. So those are two that I would shout out for sure.
Amazing. Cool. And last but not least here, we've got Kevin Johnson, who's the creative director for the Denver Broncos. Kevin has been with the Broncos for just over a year and previously led creative for the Cleveland Cavaliers, where he saw multiple championship runs and an epic comeback win over Cristina's Warriors. Kevin is one of the newest Air customers. Not sure if that deal is actually signed yet, Kevin, but I thought I would preempt it. And we're truly thrilled to have him with us today to share some of his wisdom. Kevin, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be a part of the conversation today. There may be some Cleveland Golden State jabs thrown, but we'll keep it friendly. As far as campaigns, just things that I think are pretty cool. The NFL, their Super Bowl spot this year around the women's flag football to get athletes involved, have some humor in it. I thought that was pretty cool. And then last, the NBA All-Star game in Cleveland in 22, it was the whole NBA town was really cool. How you kind of got the bus and the kids strolling through the town, and you've got all the athletes and some legends and stuff thrown in there. Just always a cool storyline with that.
Love that. Perfect. Well, thank you all for the introductions. Last but in the mix and the least important here is me. My name's Shane Hegde. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Air. I wish I was as cool as Cristina, Kevin, and David, but I knew nothing about what it was like to lead a creative team and learned and am learning from the three of them. My background is really in media and tech. I was the chief digital officer of a television network, and then before that was a growth equity investor. So definitely learning from the space through conversations like these. So really excited to chat. Before we dive in, I just wanted to give some background on Air, which has really been a passion project for my co-founder, Tyler, and I. Both of our careers were really in media tech, and we dove into this space and have been at it for the last 5.5 years. We've raised about $37 million to date. There's about 40 people on our team. And what we've loved is we've actually raised money from about 100 CMOs and creative directors. So it is truly conversations like this that have helped push us forward as a business. And I'm thrilled to have these three individuals with us today. To narrate a bit of the story on air, the core belief that drives us is we think that every single company around the world is a media company. And the reason we believe that is because regardless of what industry you're in, you need content to tell your story. And so, to keep moving through the deck, the general belief is that the need for images and videos is growing exponentially in organizations because now the marketing team has dozens of channels, but the partnerships team and the sales team and the product org, they all need content. And unfortunately, creative teams are only scaling linearly. And anytime there's been this gap that's been unmanageable, software has come in to automate. And so that's really how we think about our work at AIR. It's to help creatives get out of these miserable logistics of the creative process and back into the work that matters, having fun and thinking about the next campaign and workshopping. And we think about those logistics as creative ops or creative operations. And we call ourselves at AIR the first creative operations platform. Just to narrate a little bit around how we think about creative ops and we think about our product, tactically, we're built for creative teams to manage the creative work. So we help with feedback and review cycles on the approval stage. We help collect content from agency partners. We help send content out to different stakeholders or different tools where you need content to go, your content management system, your ads manager. And tactically, on the next slide here, how we think about this is as a factory. So there's a bunch of inputs to content in AIR. We help you collect it, we help you approve it, and then we help you share it out. And so folks build a centralized library on there. That's all I generally wanted to get through around the product. Let's get to the meat of this, which is these amazing people in front of us. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to grab your phone. You can, take the camera, and this will direct you directly to our marketing site where you can learn more. But that's the diatribe for the day. Let's really focus on these three individuals and the amazing perspective they're here to bring. So we're going to talk about four specific topics. The first is the athlete and the challenges and power of what the media presence of athletes is bringing to sports content today. The second topic we'll dive into is social media, obviously, constantly changing, and I'm sure all three of you have a number of evolving perspectives around that. The third topic we'll talk about is content in sports specifically and some of the nuances about creating content in sports. And then the last topic we'll dive into is just creative direction at large and how the three of you think about your jobs and your roles at the highest level. So we'll get started with athletes. My first question, and I'm going to point to one of you, and then we'll do a little bit of a roundtable. Feel free to also interrupt and interject. But the first question is really, about influencer programs in sports. And I think we're seeing a lot of athletes lean into building their own social followings, becoming influencers, launching their own brands in many cases. How involved do you think teams should be in leveraging the talent that they have for their creative efforts? What are some examples where this has worked really well? And what are some examples where you think it hasn't? I'd love to start with David, simply because this NIL thing has thrown a big wrench into some of the mechanics of it. So Dave, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously NIL has changed the landscape in college sports, although this stuff was always important for the college athlete. Now it's on their radars more than ever. I think from a college standpoint, it's probably a different answer than the pro side, right? You get athletes who are at an earlier stage in life. I think there's more of for us, an educational process and a relationship level strategy to think about. And then for us too, I think if you talk about influencer broadly, that's current player, and then that's our former players as well. And maintaining those relationships, those connections, and being strategic about doing that, and having access to current and former players very broadly, to make sure that there's a trust. Without that, you can't really do anything, and then from there now, I think like we hired a whole position for it here within just for Duke men's basketball, Rachel Baker, in addition to my position, which is I think unique and certainly in college basketball. So you have two folks who full-time can operate at least at 20,000 foot level, to help strategize, to help educate, and then obviously, bring on more folks to help with that. So I think it has to be whatever the athlete wants, right? I mean, we have some guys come in and they want support, they want help with content, and we meet with all of them. We create a brand playbook for all of them, and then you do that when they get here, and then I think it sort of evolves from there. And some guys want your help. Most of our guys now have agents, so but being here as a resource and a sounding board is the most important thing.
Yeah. Kevin, I think what's interesting for you now is, there's this school 45 minutes away where Coach Prime is really putting on a master class in social content distribution. Obviously last year, Russell Wilson was, one of the biggest memes out there in the sports world for a number, of his interactions with the camera. But, would love your thoughts on that and how you see that, at the professional level now in relation to some of David's comments.
Yeah, I think at our level, it's interesting because you have these high profile athletes, you want to tap into that. But at the same time, there can be some inconsistency. So you can have players who have a down year, you can have players that are amazing and walk away and, join a different team in a different city. So you have to be somewhat tactful and careful about investing your team brand in one individual. There's a lot of personalities on the team, a lot of players and athletes who all want that attention, and you have to find the right medium for players to embrace the team brand, be advocates, and those folks that we want to put front and center to advocate for the team, have multiple athletes involved, but then you just got to kind of let them have their own personal brands, just to kind of fill, I guess, their purpose and what they're working towards on the outside, just so it doesn't get difficult. I mean, you run into new sequences with NBA athletes who their personal brand doesn't mesh with the team brand, and it gets tricky, it gets complicated. So I think there's a fine line that you kind of have to walk in that space.
Yeah. Cristina, curious about your opinion, especially coming from Hollywood into sports. You dealt with many celebrities. Is there any nuances to thinking about the relationship of the athletes themselves to the teams, given what you've seen?
Yeah, so like with my background, it's interesting because I'm coming in new to sports, but very familiar with athletes because I, was friendly or worked at agencies with some of these athletes' agents themselves or their management companies or worked with their production companies. So I've seen I come in only with the brand side of it. And it's interesting hearing, David's kind of set up of let's give these athletes this education, because once they've gotten to kind of our level, they already know. It's almost like they have a full strategy of like, this is my tone of voice and this is my vertical when it comes to, philanthropic pursuits. This is my, tone of voice and how I want to show up on social media accounts. This is what I'm comfortable with and what, stances or things I want to be associated from, potentially a social justice standpoint. So you kind of know, and you almost have a little bit of let's say like a dossier on each of these players. And then it becomes just a, traditional kind of cross-marketing approach. Where does something that the Warriors is trying to build or promote overlap with something one of these players genuinely believes in? Because you need that authenticity. Of course, if not, audiences are not going to resonate with it. So it feels like it's, from straight out from like a college textbook of cross-marketing opportunities when it comes to athletes, because they're not just influencers, they're brands in their own right. So when you might be an independent company and you're thinking, oh, we should collaborate with someone, you're going to look for that crossover, whether it's in mission, vision, values, or beliefs or whatnot. And then I think in our use of, let's say, traditional influencers, if you will, the people who may have a large following on social but aren't necessarily an athlete, we usually cross those over sometimes with athletes, but then also to give our, let's say, our fan base a different tone of voice, because there's, certain things, and I'm sure Kevin and David feel this way, that as a brand, you maybe don't want to posture or say, or has a little bit too much personality or might be perceived a certain way. But when it's coming from the fan base, it can feel a little bit more confident or a little bit more, we all work in sports. So there's a little bit of trying to, let's say, shoot fire at the rival or egg things on or make something a little bit more passionate and heated. as an organization, we wouldn't lead with that, but the fan base feels like that, so they get to authentically kind of talk that way. So we use influencers that are not our athletes in that kind of capacity as well, to give our Dub Nation, let's say, a little bit of more of a personality.
Yeah. How, staying on this topic of the athlete, curious on the three of your perspectives and things, feel free to chime in ad hoc. Do your athletes respect, like, do they look to you for content? Do they think of you as a production partner? Like, if, I don't know, they had a great dunk in a game or threw a great pass or made a great catch, are they like, hey, could you send me content around that? And is that a request that happens often? Just curious on how the sort of like content you're developing, how often it gets disseminated through their own owned and operated channels.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Kev.
Yeah, there's definitely, our content team, and I experienced this at the NBA level too, and here in the NFL, we're feeding our players content, on-field shots, photography, just content that we're already capturing that can help them, push their brand, and they can push out their images, help kind of build that collective. And I guess the other part of your question, obviously only being here a year in, haven't experienced it yet, but on the NBA side, we would have some athletes ask for time with us just to sit down and say, hey, I want to build my personal brand. Can you help me? What's the right path? What, how can I get content? What should I be working on? Here's my image. Here's what I want to portray. And then we would just kind of sit with them and spend some time and talk that through a little bit, and, try to push them down the right path, and then see what we could do to help them. How can we kind of curate some content for them?
Absolutely. David, I think you were going to say.
Yeah, similar. I mean, like all these guys come in and they want content right now for them. Photography being the main one. So we have an app, we use Air to organize, and we have another app where we can share some of the content directly, where they get alerts on their phone. And then there's the educational piece I mentioned. They do come to us. The other interesting turn of events, I think, on the NAL side now, some of these brands sort of may look to us or ask if there are resources around where we can help assist in creation of content around like a brand deal. And there's some NCAA rules with that too that we have to navigate, but that's a whole new deal. And we want to make sure these guys look good in their brand deals as well. So that's been kind of a whole new world for us resource wise to navigate. Yeah.
And Cristina, I mean, Draymond Green has his own podcast, I think he works with Mav Carter, so Spring Hill, I'm sure, are Steph Curry's of the world, are these people bringing in their own production teams that need access to the floor and want to ask you for B-roll? How what's that integration like? Have you seen any of that? Just curious, that level of scale.
Yeah, so it depends. Obviously, it's all situational, but yeah, the athletes you mentioned at that level, they have, teams, production companies, they are, doing a lot of content on their own, but you still see a lot because of, us knowing them well and knowing what they'd like, that there's a lot of repost or them wanting content that they know they shot because they're present for. And so they'll say, oh, whatever happened to blah, 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 I'd love to post it, or could you send that to my team or whatnot? So there is some collaboration happening. In terms of access, I'm sure you can imagine the court is a very popular place, so that's pretty restricted, but there's a lot of sharing from things that we collect that we send over, because it's, while of course our focus is building the Warriors brand is associated with the players brand, so it's a lot of working alongside and working together. So we have pretty good relationships across the board with, whether it be their full-fledged production companies or, independent social media teams or individual, managers.
Yeah, it's a good transition to our next topic here on social specifically. Look, the Broncos, the Golden State Warriors, Duke men's basketball have Instagram accounts with millions of followers, and similar, on TikTok or Twitter. As you all have been academics of the space in many ways, you've been in this industry for years. How have you seen social media change your job through the course of the last number of years? And where do you see that, in the next 5 years, which social channel are you all thinking about putting and directing the most amount of your attention and energy on? Curious, maybe we could start with Kevin.
Yeah, I having worked in the industry for 20 years, I mean, I've definitely seen the swing where social impacts everything. Content is king. So it's all about that constant news feed. What can we update? How can we keep eyes on us with so many things trying to capture eyeballs? How can we keep our brand, our message, our narrative kind of front and center? So we want to feed that. You know, fans are looking for that access behind the scenes that they can't get. What's the content that feels exclusive to them? So the addition of cameras and spaces and, you know, capturing practice footage and all of that, I think is important. And I, as a fan, you know, I like to follow that too. You know, I follow all the other teams just to see what they're giving access to, what kind of podcasts, what kind of, you know, a lot more teams are doing the on the road segments in their own YouTube channels where they're kind of curating their own documentary style footage, which is awesome. And you kind of get that voice and you get to know the human instead of the athlete, which I think is cool. But, you know, I think back to your original question, I mean, content is everything. And that's pretty much what we're working towards is how can we produce that constant feed? How can we get the you know immediate news release? How can we stay on top of all that stuff? So we have to model our workflow around that and be ready for kind of.
And is there a channel you're going to make a bet on for the next 5 years if you had to pick one?
I'm probably gonna stay with Instagram. I'm an Instagram guy. I'll probably stay there. TikTok is also intriguing. I think that's going to grow, but we'll see what happens as a platform. But those are probably my two areas of emphasis.
Yeah. What about you, Cristina? I mean, curious on how, you know, especially as you're stepping into this new role and you're shaping the strategy, how do you think about social, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, social, I mean, social exists. I want to say social is tough, but it's tough in the sense that I think it's what Kevin was alluding to, is it changed workflows. Like there's no longer the days of, you know, time to retouch and do a proper edit. And it's just how can we quickly get that photo and within seconds get it posted. And that doesn't leave a lot of time for, you know, creative curation or any sort of thinking, or really just you know, you almost have a list of objectives like, okay, we need to capture this because this feeds into our bigger brand strategy. But if you get something that's like a little bit left, but it's cool, but like, what do you do with it? And it's almost like you don't even have time to process or think because you have to just quickly react. If not, someone's going to beat you to it. And if someone else beats you to it, then you lose everything. So the social media has been the toughest because of workflow. And I just feel like it takes a lot of what I think is the creative process away, which is thinking and taking a step back and being critical, asking opinions of others, coming back, you know, back to when we're all in, you know, whether it's design school or what, but like group critiques are very valuable. And so that has kind of not gone away or completely not existent in the social world for things that are quick and fast. Obviously, there's other things that have lead time, so you can still use that process. In terms of where social is going, you know, obviously there was a minute that Vine was popular, disappeared, then TikTok has kind of taken this place. In my mind, they serve that same kind of hungry, bite-sized, short-term content. And then I feel like the other extreme of popularity right now is like very highly produced, longer form content. It's not exactly for social media, but you oftentimes talk about it on social media, and then people will go to, you know, a streamer or YouTube or wherever to watch it. So I think where we're going is somewhere in the middle where you don't have this like, you know, short 15, 30-second content shot in phone, but you don't have the extreme of these super high budget, highly produced, you know, docu-series that are episodes that it's like, what is that dive deep where you feel like you're getting something authentic from whether it's the individual or the team, but it is maybe not 30 seconds. So I feel like we're going to see a world where you have a popularity, let's say, of like honestly, a hybrid of like a YouTube Reddit is where I see social going, where you have those kind of group and social conversations happening and people have that sense of community, but you're able to kind of digest these, you know, 3 to 15-minute pieces. So in terms of like, I think social will evolve with what is the appetite for content length. And I feel like we're moving towards the 3 to 15-minute being the sweet spot. So then there will need to be a platform that supports that. And as of now, you know, where does that really sit? And in general, there's just a hunger for community. So I think Reddit has never really fallen off, and I feel like it might have a resurgence.
I think, yeah, I think and maybe to that Reddit is a really interesting pick there. There's a couple of follow-ups in the chat, given your first point about the sort of ad hoc nature of social content. In your role, do you think about would you like in an ideal world, would you like to be a sort of a safeguard against errors around that? Do you like that it's sort of ad hoc? Should it be planned? Should it be real time? Like, what's your perspective as a creative director of a team?
Yeah.
What's just happening Wild West on social. I'm sure
Yeah.
David's gonna have a hot take too, but I'd love to hear yours first.
I mean, my personal joy in life where there's no like legal team that I worry about, and there's no sort of like ramifications or like internet trolls who are going to destroy us, would be to have it be more ad hoc and risky and like you post things and like it didn't land, so what? That would be much more interesting. But we live in a world where it's like everything is up for like judgment, and that's kind of social. So as a, Cristina, as the role I job protecting the brand, it just can't be as ad hoc as I would like it to be. But I'd like to see social be a little bit more cavalier.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, David, you got 18-year-olds that walk in the door with millions of followers, and an Instagram story can get them in trouble, whether it's in the league or at schools. Just so curious on how you think about all of this over at Duke.
Yeah, I mean, from an athlete standpoint, all you can do is educate them and hope for the best. And we haven't had, knock on wood, haven't had any issues. I will say too, like, our guys don't always have the best social strategy. They're not always posting in the moment or whatever, which actually can be a good thing in some ways too, because they're avoiding some of these potential hurdles. I guess zooming out a bit, I think, it's almost, I don't want to say discouraging time and kind of rain on the parade a little bit, but I'm into like the longer form storytelling. And, for us, I was looking at it the other day, 16 of our top 20 posts this year in terms of reach, all included content shot on iPhone, all posts we got out, pretty quick. And we have a couple, talented, like everyone has some talented content creators, and you love to be able to tell your story and get eyes on that and really evoke emotion. And you can't do that as well in some of these shorter, faster hitting, TikTok style videos. So that's kind of the lay of the land. That's where it's going. So to segue into the next part of your question, I would say, I think at least for right now, existing platforms, TikTok's really well positioned outside of the potential political questions, depending on how you look at that. And then YouTube, YouTube's kind of stood the test of time. It's still a great position for the long form. There is certainly good data and analytics around the younger demo. And for us, that recruit age demo is as important as for anyone. A lot of time being spent on YouTube. So I would say those two platforms, at least for now. And I do think there's potential, at least next, if we want to go out to like 5 years, yeah, there's a potential. I agree with Cristina, maybe for another platform to kind of bubble up here. It's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. Maybe, switching just for sake of time, switching to the next topic of content in sports specifically. Would love to actually start with Cristina. You made this shift into sports. We actually had a conversation a few weeks ago about whether that shift was big or large, and where you felt those differences. Curious, for the audience, what was it that drew you to sports creative, and how unique do you think it is against other forms of content? Just curious in your perspective there.
Yeah, so I shared with Shane, I shared with you that I have a little bit of a romantic view on sports. So I always wanted to work in sports eventually because I felt like I needed to pay it forward. So I worked, my first job was in advertising for retail fashion brands on CPG, then went into traditional entertainment on the agency side, then worked at creative agencies, everything that was not sports. But I excelled very quickly at my career because I talked sports at the office. And I was suddenly being invited to drinks after work or fantasy football leagues or whatever they were. So I was the one woman at the seat at the table with a lot of very high level executives. So for me, sports was the easiest way to kind of equalize what felt like a very large, gender gap in the workplace. So I felt like I needed to come work in sports as a thank you. You got me very far in my career very quickly. I need to kind of pay it forward. And if that inspires other people to, other women to feel comfortable talking sports, that's great. And I thought it would be very different, but it oddly, there's all the pieces of my previous career in here, in the sense that, you know, athletes have agents. I worked with Earth agents. I know the agency side, you know, coming from WME. WME had acquired IMG, sports management. I, again, worked with a lot of management, you know, a lot of the managers on that side because of the acquisition. I'd worked for creative agencies who had, you know, been the agency of residency for multiple teams, so I knew the ad side. And then dating back all the way to, you know, retail fashion, we also care about the growth of our, you know, merchandise store and our, you know, warriorshop.com. So all of the pieces of everything I've done oddly feed into this. And at the end of the day, entertainment, which was a lot driving towards, okay, how do we pack the theater for opening weekend, or how do we, you know, max out on binge watches on this series that's coming out this weekend, so we have these great ratings or these great numbers, etc. It's all the same in terms of, okay, how do we, you know, pack out Chase Center? How do we make sure the in-game experience is so good that every time? So every piece of every job that I've had feeds into this one in a really beautiful way of understanding, you know, working on for production companies and post-production houses and creative teams, having, you know, starting my career as a graphic designer, all of it kind of feeds into this. So it strangely is not different. I thought there'd be a huge learning curve, and I kept calling myself the rookie, and I was like, oh yeah, it'll be like 6 months before I like know how to do anything, because I got so much to learn. There's still a lot to learn, but the basics are there, which is really nice that skill sets are transferable across industries.
And you know, Kevin, you've worked between the Cavaliers and now, and even before that, you've been around 15 years in sports. David, you know, closer to 20 plus. Like, what has kept both of you in this industry that really, I don't know, it's gotta be love. Other than that, I don't know what it would be, but what about the specificity of sports content keeps you going?
Yeah, I definitely think there's, you know, love of the game. Having been, you know, high school athlete, played in college, you want to stick around, you want to be a part of the game, and just finding ways to marry two passions of sport and creative, like it was a no-brainer. So that's kind of what piqued my interest and got me involved. And then I think once you're around it and you can marry those passions, you learn about the reach of sport as well. So you can be a part of a brand that you have a local reach, you have a regional, an international reach, you work with athletes, so you can kind of shape that voice, and it makes for a really easy conversation. You know, my wife and I, whenever we meet new folks and they're like, oh, what do you do? She'll introduce, you know, herself and talk about her job, and she's like, but my husband has a much more exciting job. Let's talk about sports. So it's obviously an easy conversation piece as well. But yeah, I think ultimately for me, it was that alignment of when I first got into sport and realizing that I could be around the game and marry it with creative. And at that time, you know, creative was a piece of it, but the amount that a brand plays, creative plays in sports today is insane. You know, we just talked about social and the need for content. So there is that kind of adrenaline too that keeps you involved in constantly creating. There's no shortage of a need for creative content.
David, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I would basically say the same. You know, I grew up playing hockey and loving sports, so you know, it gets you to be part of a team. It gets you in the game in a different way. You know, and on the creative side, obviously there are opportunities to really put your stamp on something, and we all love like the emotion of sport, right? The passion of sport. That's why we watch, that's why we play. And our job on the creative side in particular, like that's our job, is to showcase that, to storytell around that. And I love that. You know, those stories being kind of the folks that share that for your program, your brand. That's dope. And I'm a competitive person too. You know, you get to the analytics side of this thing, and it can be very cause and effect driven and competitive. So there's that side of it for me too.
Yeah, you know, there's actually a really interesting question in the chat from Liam McDonough about, you know, some of the success of the team and how that relates to performance of the content that all of you are creating. The specific question is, how often do you pivot your team's content direction dependent on the success of the season or your superstar athlete's success? Do you have set check-ins, or does it fluctuate on monumental moments in the season? Cristina, I feel like we just had a really interesting conversation about this over drinks. Yeah, you know, when you're thinking about the brand of the Warriors, success they've had recently, you know, maybe would love to start with you again.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember our conversation because it was apparently so impactful, but I feel
There's a lot of
like,
wisdom there, let me
I
tell you.
mean, I'm really fun. If you, Shane took me to some over the top tiki bar, and I think I will tell any story if you give me a drink with a little pineapple on it. So yeah, but no, I think in terms of, you know, the brand, it's tough because like the work that I do is like years down the line. So like everyone thinks about, oh, the brand right now, and they're thinking, you know, we just won. They think about, you know, literally we won last night, but we hadn't won, you know, many games in a row. It's so current. Whereas I'm thinking kind of in the future tense that it's like, and this is where I'm going to give David a bit of a compliment. Part of me is like, how do we make this franchise a little bit more like a, you know, top university institution where it doesn't matter who the players on the court is. You are a fan of that organization, because our brand is so associated with our players, which is wonderful because we've had really great players for many years and they have, you know, very complementary personalities to our brand. But, you know, the way sports works, eventually they retire. So what happens to the brand when your core is lost? And that to me is where we have to do the work now to then not feel those pains, you know, 5-10 years from now. So how do you build something that it's not exactly irrelevant who's on the court, but the fandom is there because it's, you know, it means something to be a Warriors fan. And that's literally been my like number one on my to-do list every day is like, what does that mean? Define that for me. I'm also new to the Bay Area, so I'm coming in as like a very fresh perspective, and I've been pretty critical because that's literally the job of a creative director. So anyone who's a super fan, sorry about that.
Into the Bay, it's supposed to be critical.
Yeah, I'm originally from Chile, so I talk football, not, you know, American football. So yeah, it's a little tough when I think, you know, I ask people, oh, tell me why you're a Warriors fan, but don't use a player's name. It becomes a little bit of a challenge. So that's our brief. How do you define the brand, and how do you define, you know, being a Warriors fan or a member of Dorm Nation, or how you want to phrase the question? And that means something in a way that some of, you know, these very big franchises that, you know, whether they're our own sport or outside the sport, mean. And I think, you know, college institutions do a really great job of it because players cycle through so quickly that while you can use players to support the brand, it really is, you know, I'm sure for Dave, it's really about, you know, Duke University or Duke basketball. And there could be a stronger association with the coach because coaches have longer tenures than players do. But it's one of those things of defining the brand is a bit of a challenge for us because we've had such amazing players that they've done the work for us.
Yeah.
But what happens 5 years from now? I don't want to be hurting when we're like, we'll have no identity because our identity retired.
Yeah. Dave, I mean, Dave, you obviously you just had Coach K step down. You cycle players in and out now every 18 months. You know, how have you thought about maintaining the sort of presence of the Blue Devils as the brand away from just the ebbs and flows of the season?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we made a good strategic decision a few years back. We had this legendary head coach, right? And he was a reason that a lot of us all loved Duke and was a draw for Duke basketball, but he wasn't going to last forever. You hoped he would. So we sort of created this brotherhood concept, and that was a way to kind of extend beyond one specific player, but to sort of tie in the values and what it means to be a Duke basketball player and to stay in touch with those guys, although they may be here for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. A guy like Jason Tatum, you know, or even a guy like Grant Hill or Christian Laettner, those guys are always a part of this. And that's different than a pro team too, in a lot of ways, because they may go into another team and it sort of loses its luster. Whereas we have this connectivity. And of course you have your traditions, your tried and true traditions that go back years and years. And you want to showcase those and promote those, the kids tenting out for games, the Cameron crazies, all those things. So, you got to lean in there, and then bringing in a new coach with Coach Shire. That was the whole kind of a new world for us, where you had your brand, but maybe you had to shift a little bit and lean in a direction that fit him differently than Coach K. So we've done that, and that started with talking to him and helping him feel out what his brand needs to be, and then figuring out how we how we could kind of shift our strategy a little bit without reinventing the wheel, because it didn't necessarily need to be reinvented. And I don't think baseball is this brand that, you know, is this like crazy shifting wild, brand that's never been Duke or Duke basketball. So I think there's a balance.
Was the curious on the brotherhood point you made, was that an intentional sort of creative decision to really draw that out once it started, or how did it start, pick up steam, and how did you think about carrying that message forward as a part of the brand itself?
Yeah, I mean, it was me and now the current head coach at Pitt basketball, Jeff Capel. He was at Duke at the time and very in tune with our work. Although he was a coach, he valued it. So he and I would text and at all hours. And so came with this idea to make the brother the thing, to be ready for, when Coach may retire. Although Coach K was kind of the reason for a lot of the success, it would. This was sort of a brand that was so strong and defined, even although I've been here a long time, even defined by the time I came in. So what can you add to the brand identity that isn't already there, other than strengthening what's already there? And this brother concept was something. So we pulled it in and hoped that they would hit. It resonated way more than I ever thought. But like when Zion Williamson committed, he's like, he didn't say I'm committing to Duke, I'm committing to Coach K, I'm joining the brother of Duke University. That's when we knew it hit. Like we had something. And then the next wave sees that. And so it's become kind of a badge of honor that transcends one player, one coach, one person, and everyone could be proud of it, including the fans.
Unbelievable. It's truly unbelievable. I mean, Kevin, maybe just to wrap with you, like are you thinking about brand messaging and carrying some of that stuff forward? Like how you curious on any of your thoughts from the last two?
Yeah, I think, the one thing that Cristina said that I would piggyback on, I go back to my minor league baseball roots, and you can't attach your brand to a player, especially in minor league baseball. You could have a top 10 prospect, and it feels like, the higher prospect they are, the shorter shelf life they could be in your city before they advance up in the level. So, you could easily be like, hey, we've got, our center fielder, number 2 prospect in baseball. But in 2 months he could be gone. So you're building your experience, and you want to build that brand experience from the in-game content, from parking your car, walking in, mobile apps now. Like, what is that experience, and how can those touch points of fandom relate back to your brand? And then the athletes are just the icing on the cake. You have a Steph, you have a Clay, you have multiple championships. Like, that is the bonus. That is like the icing on your brand. But it really takes a lot of work to get that consistent voice and that foundation to keep fans coming back and to kind of know what they're walking into.
Yep, that's fantastic. Maybe again, just for the sake of time, let's shift to the sort of last section here about your roles. There are many folks on the call today who are aspiring creative directors or are trying to get into sports specifically. The first question I have is really about, the job of a creative director. How do each of you define it? And what is one of the most frustrating things about that job? As I think we'll start maybe with David and then work our way to Cristina and Kevin.
That's a tough question. So I think probably my answer might be a little bit different, again, being on the college side and specific to like one program on the college side. For me, my role is to sort of bring kind of all elements of the brand together. And that's social first and foremost, but I think beyond that, I oversee a creative team of a couple video guys. We have a photographer, obviously graphic design and all that. So I think one broadly is to sort of guide the creative vision, to stay connected with our coaching staff and other key stakeholders in our brand, and make sure like the high level vision is consistently displayed. And then from there, it's connecting all of our creators, making sure everyone has a voice, everyone has ownership in what we're doing. I think being very aware that I don't know everything, and finding voices that complement, skill sets that complement everyone that we have around or could access to tell our story, to get that content out at a high level. I think if there was a frustration point, that's a good question. I think I'm always like a big advocate for the creator, and I think it's taken time. Even now to this day, I don't think they're compensated quite what they should be. So much time goes into this. Like, there's such an amazing skill set and creative drive by a lot of these creators, and a lot of it's taken for granted. And I think too, like pro level, college level, the envelope's been pushed. Like the level of content quality that's out there, it's insane. And so I think like if there's one frustration point, like it's maybe the higher levels don't necessarily like get it and see it like they could or should, to drive the energy, the resources down. Not that they're not, but at the level that like I see it, because it's so impressive and inspiring. All these, you see it all over. I'm not just saying at Duke, all over pro level. The bar is so high now, and the more that those folks are respected, appreciated, and resourced, the better we'll all be.
Before we go to Cristina, Kevin, just to stay on that for a minute, David, like does this whole AI automated content generation, does that further this narrative that like content creation is cheap, within that frustration, or how do you think about the stuff that's happening there?
Yeah, I've obviously studied that. I don't know exactly where that will go or how that will affect anything yet, to be honest. I don't think you can, there's nothing that you can ever do. There's no tool or whatever that will ever take away from like being in the moment, the real emotion, the real perspective. And you're going to need people to tell those stories and be on the front lines and do that in their own cool ways. So, I don't think like AI or whatever will take away from that, but I think we're really early stages here. I don't have the answer.
Cristina, maybe shifting to you around the definition of your role and the key frustration you have within it right now.
Yeah, I think David kind of set me up really well, because I think time is the most valuable resource always. And I think that is my constant frustration in my role is like cart before the horse. We've moved to execution and we haven't even properly thought through the creative construct, which is the role in a nutshell. It's what is the parameters that we are thinking within for this specific campaign or season or overall brand, whatever it is. So establishing that creative construct takes a lot of tissue sessions, thinking, thought, like kind of how I was saying earlier with the traditional, like take a step back, open it up for critique, get different perspectives, not just creative perspectives, but what does PR think? What does legal think? What does this team think? What does that team think? So the role is really defining that creative construct, so then I can empower those that report into me to execute within their vertical. So someone who works on the production side can think about, the creative landscape and the constructs that they're working within, and know that this idea feeds into that, and then they can run with it without having to, get a million approvals or gut check things or feel disempowered and like they're just executing what, the big fancy creative director told them to do. So I think the role is more so creating that creative playground for everyone else to play and do their job and showcase, their specific specialty really, really well. Oftentimes I think creative director, it's always a very sexy term, but it's a very not glamorous job in its own right, because if you're a good creative director, you're difficult to work with, period, because you are defending the construct that you've created. If design was done by committee, we would end up with a lot of real ugly looking, confusing, messy things. So, good creative directors always have to dabble that line and accept the fact that it's like, my job is to, push back on people, fight with people, hold my ground, this and that. But the only way I'm effective doing my job is if I'm extremely likable. So how do you teeter this line of accepting that you are difficult to work with, and everyone is like, oh, I got an email from Cristina, what's this going to say? But they open it with a smile because they like you or this, and then you're, people want to do whatever the crazy thing that I'm like, that doesn't work because it's outside the construct. So it's this fine line, and that in its own right is challenging, is how do you become difficult to work with, but extremely efficient in the role, and likability is what I found to be the most helpful. But it's both challenging because it makes for, a frustrating day to day when you're just constantly pushing back.
Yeah. Well, if you push back and you're unlikable, you can just rebrand to a co-founder.
Yeah. Then somehow you're like, don't work there anymore. It's a whole different, a whole different path.
Kevin, anything to add there before we go to our final question?
Yeah, I think that both Cristina and David summarized that well. David, speaking from like an air traffic control standpoint, it's our job to empower the creators to have that big picture vision, but really align our creatives in a way where they can excel, they can feel alive, they can feel like they're really kind of moving and impacting our brand. And then from Cristina's point, we sit in the room and we have to push back. Creative is always subjective, so it's how do we either sell an idea, how do we maybe align with an idea that's coming, that's like, hey, this idea is going to happen, let's figure it out one way or the other. So then it becomes our job to take the new idea with the existing idea and merge the worlds together, which can be crazy. So yeah, it's a lot. I think, you know, one of the pieces that you had baked in there as well, just how to do it well. I think listening is such a key component in terms of creative direction. Hearing, you know, what's being asked for, hearing what's around our brand, and then hearing the designers. So you got to constantly be listening to the world around you and just figure out how to position all those shells.
Yeah. Well, you know, our last question, just to close for time. Look, this is a software company's webinar, so we have to ask. Besides Air, what other content platforms are you using to efficiently produce, design, organize, and distribute content to your athletes and fans? Any perspective and guidance you could give to the audience around like the tools you love in your tech stack that can help enable their respective work. Maybe we'll start with Cristina, because you're building yours in real time here.
Yeah, so I mean, we obviously use a lot of softwares across the board, but I think for that specific question in terms of content in real time and sharing things quickly, we use, you know, Frame and Frame Links to kind of do that across teams, some that might not even be present on site. And then, you know, that is always contingent to how is the internet working. And sometimes we literally just run cards. So it's amazing how we both love technology, and then sometimes you always need kind of that backup plan. So I would, yeah, those two, Frame and then human power of running quickly.
Kevin, anything to add in your stack specifically?
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier about having the app where we can push photography to our players. You know, that's an important piece. Obviously sharing internally and then externally with clients. That's where products like Air comes into play. And then, you know, I think one other piece that we use, you know, Yinscam from a mobile application design has been huge in setting us up with the tools to successfully work in-house, or to lean on, you know, that outside provider has been great as well. So I think those are some of the big things that we work with.
Cool. David, you round it out.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously Air, on Air all the time. Influencers, one we use to push the photo content, video content out to our athletes. And then Adobe Creative Suite. I mean, probably everyone's familiar with that. Adobe Express is sort of like the sister app that's really useful. Analytics, we don't have like a huge budget like a pro team might. We use Sprout Social for that. And then the stats company that sources all the stats, like they have this sister company, Stats Perform, which in real time will source like the live stats. And when it's halftime, like the halftime graphic, the stats are up there with one click, not me or someone going through and adding into Photoshop what they are and dropping a picture easily. So those are the ones, you know, that I would say we use the most.
Amazing. Well, a big thank you to Cristina, David, and Kevin. Seriously, this meant a lot. We really do appreciate your time. If there's folks who ask questions, we'll try to get them your way, maybe over email, but we really do appreciate all of you for generously donating your time and perspective today. And to the audience, please keep your eye out for an email from our team. We'd love to get any feedback on this discussion. If you'd like us to host another one, please let us know. We'd love doing this. This is our first time running a webinar, so you know we're out here learning in real time. And it's also my job to say we'd love to set you up for some time to learn more about Air. You can check us out at air.inc. And I, constantly love getting feedback from folks like yourselves. So